I was 31 when I first understood that intuition isn't a vague feeling. It's a survival mechanism. At the time, my life from the outside looked clean, curated, and enviable. I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, in a cedar-sided house tucked into the hills, the kind with wide windows and too much morning light. I had a career that was finally gaining momentum, a marriage that photographed well, and a family circle that showed up smiling to every gathering. My name is Elena Mercer. And the first time I thought my husband might be trying to hurt me, I was holding a porcelain mug that smelled wrong. It was a Sunday morning, the kind people romanticize. Fog lifting off the Blue Ridge Mountains, soft jazz playing from a speaker on the counter. My husband, Rowan, stood at the kitchen island, carefully pouring coffee like it was a ritual. He had always been deliberate that way. Measured. Thoughtful. Or at least that's what I used to call it. "Try this," he said, sliding the mug toward me. I changed the blend. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I noticed it because I'd learned to notice things like that. The coffee smelled metallic. Not burnt. Not sour. Just sharp. Like pennies left too long in water. My stomach tightened instantly, the way it had started to do more often over the past year. "You're not drinking it?" Rowan asked, tilting his head. "I will," I said, lifting the mug. "It's hot." That was my first lie of the day. I didn't take a sip. I pretended to, the way you do when you're a child and don't want to hurt someone's feelings. I let the rim touch my lips, inhaled and lowered it again. Rowan watched the entire time. This wasn't the first time my body had reacted before my mind could catch up. Over the previous 8 months, I'd been to urgent care twice, and they were once. Dizziness. Tremors. Nausea so intense it felt like my organs were trying to escape. Every time the doctors shrugged. Stress. Dehydration. Anxiety. Every time, it happened after I'd eaten or drunk something prepared by either Rowan or his sister, Maribel. Maribel lived 40 minutes away in Greenville, South Carolina, but might as well have lived in our guest room. She was always present. Always helpful. Always watching. She worked in the same industry I did, strategic consulting, but at a rival firm. We never talked about it directly. We didn't have to. It sat between us like a third person at every dinner table. That afternoon, we were supposed to drive to Maribel's place for a small family brunch. Just the three of us. That alone made my shoulders tense. I told myself I was being dramatic. I always told myself that. "You've been working too hard," Rowan said as we drove. "You look exhausted." There it was again. That phrase. Working too hard. I glanced at him. "I feel fine." He nodded, hands steady on the wheel. "Good. You should slow down though." Maribel's house was immaculate in a way that felt aggressive. White walls. Minimal art. Everything placed deliberately like a showroom pretending to be a home. She greeted us with kisses on the cheek and an embrace that lingered a second too long. "Elena," she said warmly. "You look thin." "I've been busy," I replied. She smiled. "That's what worries me." The table was already set. 3 cups. 3 plates. Everything symmetrical. The coffee was already poured. As I sat down, the familiar smell reached me again. That same metallic edge, faint but unmistakable. My pulse picked up. Across from me, Maribel stirred her cup without drinking. Rowan didn't touch his. "Special roast," Maribel said lightly. "Rowan's been experimenting." "For Elena," Rowan added. They exchanged a glance so quick most people would have missed it. I didn't. That was the moment something inside me clicked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, irreversible shift. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't coincidence. And it definitely wasn't care. I smiled, wrapped my fingers around the mug and made a decision that would change everything. I was done ignoring myself. And whatever was happening to me, whatever they thought they were doing, I was going to find the truth. Even if it destroyed the life I thought I had. By the time we left Maribel's house, my smile felt stapled on. I kept my face calm all the way back to Asheville, laughing at Rowan's little comments, nodding at the right moments, letting him believe I was still the same Elena who apologized for being sensitive and blamed her own body for betraying her. Inside I was counting. 1 cup of coffee I hadn't drunk. 2 pairs of eyes tracking me anyway. 3 hospital visits in 8 months. And 1 truth I didn't want to name out loud yet. The mountains blurred past the car window like a screensaver. Rowan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his thigh, relaxed in a way that made my skin crawl. "You were quiet," he said. "Just tired," I replied. He hummed like he was filing that answer away. "You should take tomorrow off." I turned my head slowly. "Why?" He blinked once too long. "Because you've earned it." "Because you've earned it" sounded kind. It also sounded like a script. At home I went straight to the bathroom and locked the door. My hands shook as I turned on the faucet, letting water run until the noise filled the space. I leaned over the sink and stared at myself. My eyes were the same. My face was the same. But something in my expression had changed, like a curtain had lifted, revealing a room I'd been refusing to enter. I wasn't going crazy. I was finally paying attention. I'd always been the kind of person who solved problems with structure. In college, when my mother got sick and my world tilted, I didn't fall apart. I made schedules, lists, contingency plans. Control was the way I loved myself. So that night, when Rowan fell asleep beside me, breathing evenly, one arm thrown across the sheet like a man with nothing to hide, I slipped out of bed, padded quietly into my office and opened my laptop. I created a document titled, Incident Log. No emotion. Just facts. Date. Who was present. What I ate or drank. Symptoms. Timeline. Medical notes. It felt cold, almost clinical. But I needed cold. If I let myself feel too much, I'd drown. As I typed, patterns jumped off the page like they'd been waiting for permission. Every incident followed the same arc. A meal, a drink, a comment about how hard I worked, then the sudden collapse of my body as if someone had flipped a switch. The worst of it had been in June. Rowan had come home early, smiling like he'd brought me a gift, carrying a cardboard box from a bakery I liked downtown. He'd set it on the counter and kissed my forehead. "I thought we could have breakfast together," he'd said. It had been sweet. It had been domestic. I'd been wrong. I'd eaten half a lemon scone. Drunk a glass of orange juice he'd poured. 20 minutes later I'd started sweating through my shirt. My hands tingled. My vision narrowed as if the world was closing in around me. Rowan had been beside me instantly. Too instantly. "You're dehydrated," he'd said, guiding me to the sofa. "You forget to drink water." He'd spoken like a man explaining my own body to me. Then as I tried to protest, Maribel had called. Rowan had put her on speaker. "Elena's not feeling well," he told her. Maribel's voice had been syrupy concern. Again. "Poor thing. It's your stress, Elena. You can't keep burning like that." Even in that moment, my skin clammy, my heartbeat irregular, I remembered thinking, how did she know? How did she already know I was sick? That memory sat heavy in my chest now as I stared at the log. My fingers hovered over the keyboard and for the first time, I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding. What did they get out of this? I didn't have to guess for long. The next day at work, I got pulled into a glass conference room with my director, Blaine Ochoa, a tight-lipped man who never wasted words. He slid a folder across the table. "The Vesper Ridge deal is moving fast." My heart jumped. Vesper Ridge was huge. National expansion, high-profile investors, the kind of account that put your name on other people's radar. "I know," I said, trying to sound steady. "I've been prepping the final strategy deck." Blaine studied me. "You sure you can deliver?" There it was again, in a different mouth with a different shape. I forced a smile. "Of course." He tapped the folder. "Because their board asked for you by name. If you're out, if you're even a little unstable, we lose the advantage." Unstable. The word lodged in me like a splinter. I thought of my ER bracelet from June. The doctor's gentle, baffled shrug. The way Rowan had spoken for me, over me, like I was too foggy to be trusted. By lunch, my phone buzzed with a text from Rowan. "Thinking of you. Don't forget to eat." It should have sounded caring. Instead, it sounded like a reminder. "Don't forget to eat. Don't forget to drink. Don't forget to let us close enough to control what goes into you." That afternoon, I did something that felt both paranoid and necessary. I bought a second phone. No account link. No shared plan. I told myself it was for security, work travel, backups, emergencies. The truth was simpler. I needed a witness that wasn't tied to him. That evening, Rowan suggested dinner. "I'll cook," he offered. My entire body tightened at the word. "I already ate at the office," I lied. He didn't argue. He only looked at me with that half-smile that never reached his eyes. "Hey," he said. "Hey then." Something relaxing. He moved toward the kettle. And that's when I noticed it, something small, almost invisible. A quick shift of his hand as he reached for the tin canister on the highest shelf. Not the chamomile I bought. Not the peppermint. Something else. Something tucked behind them like it didn't belong. I kept my expression neutral, but my heart started pounding so hard it made my ears ring. What kind? I asked casually. Rowan didn't look up. Just a blend Maribel gave me. Of course she did. I watched him measure the leaves with careful precision, like a man following instructions. He poured hot water, covered the mug with a saucer as it steeped. Then he turned and handed it to me with both hands like it was precious. Drink, he said softly. You'll feel better. The word wasn't a request. It was an expectation. I lifted the mug. The scent hit me, floral, sweet, and underneath it that same faint metallic thread. Like a signature. I raised it to my lips, pretending. I let it hover just long enough to satisfy him, then lowered it. Thank you, I murmured. Rowan watched. Then he took his own mug and walked into the living room, sitting down like he'd just checked something off a list. I stood there in the kitchen holding the tea like it was a weapon, and my mind went sharply, painfully clear. They weren't just trying to make me sick. They were trying to make me unreliable. To make my name sound like a risk. To make people doubt me the way I was starting to doubt myself. I didn't drink the tea. Instead, when Rowan went upstairs to shower, I poured it carefully into a small glass jar I'd rinsed and dried, screwed the lid on tight and tucked it into the back of the freezer behind a bag of frozen blueberries. Evidence. My hands were steady as I did it. My face remained calm when Rowan came back downstairs. How was it? He asked. Relaxing, I lied. He smiled. And I realized something else, something that made my throat go dry. If they were bold enough to do this in my house, if they were comfortable enough to watch me drink and wait for the effect, then they weren't afraid of getting caught. They were confident, which meant their plan had a timeline. And whatever they were building toward, whatever meeting, whatever presentation, whatever moment they needed me to miss, it was closer than I thought. That night, as Rowan slept, I lay awake in the dark, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing and feeling my own heartbeat thud like a warning. People talk about betrayal like it's an explosion. For me, it was a slow drip. A metallic taste in coffee. A too perfect smile. A hand that moved a fraction of a second too carefully. And the growing certainty that if I didn't act soon, the next accident wouldn't end with a hospital bracelet. It would end with a funeral. So I made myself a promise in the dark, silent and absolute. I would stop playing the role they'd written for me. I would gather proof. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just survive. I would make sure they couldn't do this to anyone else ever again. Once you accept that someone close to you may be trying to harm you, the world changes texture. Every sound sharpens. Every gesture becomes data. I stopped reacting and started observing. Rowan didn't notice at first. Or maybe he did and assumed, like always, that I'd blame myself for the shift. I still laughed at his jokes. Still kissed him goodnight. Still asked about his day. But I stopped consuming anything he prepared unless I watched every step, and even then I rarely finished it. I started carrying snacks in my bag. Protein bars. Bottled water with sealed caps. Things that couldn't be tampered with unless someone was desperate enough to be obvious. At work, my focus sharpened into something almost ruthless. The Vesper Ridge account accelerated faster than expected. Emergency board sessions. Last-minute strategy calls. One critical presentation scheduled in Denver. 3 weeks out. 3 weeks. I felt it in my bones. That was the window. The closer we got to that date, the more attentive Rowan became. He started texting me reminders to eat. Offering smoothies. Buying supplements for energy. Leaving little handwritten notes on the counter like we were newlyweds again. Maribel ramped up her presence too. She drove up to Asheville twice in 1 week, always with a reason that sounded generous. A casserole. A bottle of wine. A check-in. One evening, she leaned against my kitchen counter while Rowan grilled outside. You don't look well, she said quietly, eyes scanning my face. You're pale. I'm fine, I replied. She tilted her head. You know, if you ever feel overwhelmed, stepping back doesn't mean failure. The words were soft. The message wasn't. I smiled. Funny. My director says the opposite. Something flickered in her eyes then, gone so fast I might have missed it if I weren't already cataloging every micro-expression like my life depended on it. Because it did. That night, after they left, I turned on the backup phone and placed it face down on the kitchen counter, recording. I didn't announce it. I didn't make it obvious. I just let it exist. Rowan came in later, loosening his tie. "She worries about you," he said. "I know." He poured himself a drink. "She mentioned you seemed distracted." I met his gaze. "Did she?" He took a sip, watching me over the rim of the glass. "She just wants what's best for us." I nodded. Said nothing. Let the silence stretch. People talk more when you don't fill the space for them. The next recording happened by accident. I'd left the backup phone in my car, tucked between the seat and the console. I forgot about it completely until the next morning when I realized Rowan had taken my car to run errands. When I played the audio later, my hands went cold. Rowan's voice came through first, muffled but clear enough. "She's still functional," he said. Maribel's response followed, sharp and impatient. "Functional isn't enough. She can't be sharp in Denver." Pause. The sound of a turn signal. "She didn't drink the tea last week," Rowan added. Maribel exhaled. "Then you need to adjust. You can't keep underdosing." My chest tightened. Rowan lowered his voice. "I told you, it has to look incidental." Maribel laughed once, humorless. "Everything looks incidental if the right people say it is." I sat on the edge of my bed, the room spinning slightly, not from poison this time but from clarity. This wasn't about concern. This wasn't about slowing me down. This was strategy. That night I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I made copies. I emailed the audio to myself. Uploaded it to cloud storage under an innocuous name. Sent a version to an encrypted drive I kept hidden behind the false panel in my desk. Then I did something that felt surreal even as I did it. I called a lawyer. Not to accuse. Not yet. Just to ask questions. "What would you advise," I said carefully, "if someone suspected deliberate poisoning but didn't yet have toxicology confirmation?" There was a pause on the other end. "Documentation," the attorney said. "Medical records. Timelines. Witnesses. And above all, don't let them know you're on to them." I hung up feeling both steadier and more afraid than I'd ever been. Because now I knew. And knowing didn't make me safer. It made me a target. The next family brunch was scheduled for the Sunday before my Denver trip. At Maribel's house. I considered canceling. Inventing a meeting. A migraine. Anything. But something stopped me. They were expecting me to be there. Which meant they were planning something. And plans, by nature, create opportunities. That Sunday morning I dressed carefully. Neutral colors. Hair pulled back. No jewelry that could be commented on. I slipped the backup phone into my purse, fully charged, recording already on. As we drove, Rowan reached over and squeezed my knee. "You'll do great in Denver," he said. I smiled at the road ahead. "I know." At Maribel's, the table was set again. 3 places. 3 cups. The coffee was already poured. The smell hit me immediately. Unmistakable. My pulse quickened, but this time not from fear. From focus. I sat down slowly, deliberately. Wrapped my fingers around the warm mug. Looked from Rowan to Maribel. They watched me like gamblers watching a final card turn. I lifted the cup. And in that moment I understood something with perfect clarity. They believed the end was near. They believed I was still the woman who swallowed doubt and blamed herself. They believed wrong. I took a breath, steadying myself, and prepared to do the one thing they never accounted for. I was going to let them reveal themselves. Completely. There's a strange calm that comes right before everything breaks. I felt it as I lifted the coffee cup at Maribel's table. My hands steady, my breath even, my mind eerily quiet. The fear that had haunted me for months had crystallized into purpose. I wasn't here to drink. I was here to end it. "I just realized," I said lightly, holding the cup just below my lips. "I left my phone in the car. Work emergency. You know how it is." Rowan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Maribel smiled, but her eyes flicked to the mug. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." I stood, deliberately clumsy, and let my foot catch on the rug as I passed the table. The movement was quick, practiced. The cups slid. Porcelain clinked. "I'm so sorry," I laughed, instinctively switching the mugs as I steadied myself. "I swear I'm a walking hazard today." Rowan half stood, then sat back down. Maribel waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry about it. I walked toward the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stopped just out of sight, near the doorway to Maribel's study, and waited. Every second stretched. Through the crack I watched. Maribel reached for her cup first. A flash of doubt crossed her face, so quick it was almost invisible. Then pride or impatience or sheer confidence overrode it. She lifted the mug and took a sip. Nothing happened at first. Rowan looked down at his phone, typing. Too calm. Too rehearsed. Then Maribel's hand trembled. She froze, staring at the cup like it had betrayed her. Rowan, she said slowly. This tastes wrong. He looked up. The color drained from his face. She took another sip as if trying to convince herself she was imagining it. Her fingers began to shake violently this time. The mug rattled against the saucer. Rowan, she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. What did you put in this? He stood so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's not. His eyes darted to my untouched cup still sitting where I'd left it. That wasn't meant for you. The words landed like a gunshot. Maribel's eyes widened in horror as understanding crashed over her. You said it was safe, she gasped. You said it would only make her sick. I stepped out of the hallway. My phone was already in my hand, recording everything. I never drank it, I said quietly. Both of them turned toward me. Maribel tried to stand and failed. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the edge of the table, knocking her chair over as she slid to the floor. Her breathing came in shallow, frantic bursts. Rowan dropped beside her. Maribel, stay with me. I didn't mean, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. Call an ambulance, she cried, her voice breaking. Rowan, call 911. I already am, I said. My hands were steady as I dialed. My voice didn't shake when I gave the address. My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction to a contaminated drink. She's conscious but experiencing tremors and difficulty standing. Maribel's eyes locked onto mine, wild and pleading. You switched the cups, she whispered. Yes, I said. I did. Rowan stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Elena, please, turn that off. We can talk about this. Talk? I asked, keeping the camera trained on them. Like we talked about my hospital visits? Like you talked about how I was working too hard? Maribel convulsed, a sharp cry tearing from her throat. Rowan turned on her, panic morphing into anger. You said the dosage was safe. I said it was tested, she snapped back through clenched teeth. You were the one who increased it. You said she had to miss Denver. Denver. There it was. The sirens grew louder in the distance. You poisoned me, I said calmly, the words finally real in the air. To destroy my credibility. To take my clients. Maribel laughed weakly, hysteria creeping in. You were ruining everything. Vesper Ridge was mine. I built that relationship. And you decided the solution was to slowly kill me? Rowan didn't answer. He couldn't. The front door burst open as paramedics rushed in. I stepped aside, never stopping the recording. They worked quickly, efficiently, loading Maribel onto a stretcher as she cried out in pain and fury. As they wheeled her past me, she grabbed my sleeve. This isn't over, she rasped. I looked down at her, at the woman who had smiled across tables while calculating my decline. It is, I said. You just didn't realize it yet. Rowan tried to follow the stretcher, but one of the paramedics stopped him. I'm her husband, he insisted. I spoke before he could say anything else. And I'm the intended victim. Silence fell. The paramedic looked between us, then at the phone still recording in my hand. Ma'am, he said carefully, you might want to stay available for questions. I plan to, I replied. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens screamed back to life, Rowan stood frozen in Maribel's pristine living room, surrounded by overturned furniture and shattered certainty. His plan had failed. Not quietly. Not cleanly. But spectacularly. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew something with absolute certainty. They were no longer in control. I was. Hospitals have a way of stripping everyone down to the truth. By the time I arrived at Mission Hospital in Asheville, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a cold, deliberate clarity. I checked in calmly, gave my name and told the intake nurse exactly why I was there. I believe my sister-in-law ingested a toxic substance intended for me, I said. And I have reason to believe this has been happening for months. That got attention. Maribel was already in the ACU when they let me see her, pale, trembling, hooked up to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. Rowan wasn't allowed inside. He sat in the hallway instead, hunched forward, his face buried in his hands like a man auditioning for sympathy. I didn't give it to him. A physician with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her hair introduced herself as Dr. Callahan. She spoke quietly, precisely. We found compounds in her system that don't belong there, she said. They're not food contaminants. They're controlled research substances. My chest tightened. Would those explain unexplained neurological symptoms over several months? Her gaze sharpened. Yes. Very much so. I handed her my phone. Please listen to this. She listened. Her expression hardened with every word Maribel and Rowan had spoken at that brunch table. When it ended, she exhaled slowly. This is deliberate, she said. And it's dangerous. Rowan must have overheard because moments later he appeared at the doorway, eyes red, voice frantic. Elena, please, he said. She was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. I turned to him. Really looked at him. Do you want to explain, I asked evenly, why I have audio recordings of you discussing dosage? He froze. Security arrived not long after. Then the police. Detective Alondra Reyes was calm, thorough, and devastatingly perceptive. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush me. She listened. I gave her everything. The incident log. The recordings. The sealed jar from my freezer. The backup phone. When I finished, she nodded once. You did exactly what you should have done, she said. Trusted yourself. Rowan was questioned separately. I watched through the glass as his composure cracked piece by piece. When confronted with the recordings, he stopped denying and started minimizing. We just wanted her to rest, he said. She was taking everything. Clients. Promotions. Maribel said if Elena missed a few key meetings, things would rebalance. By poisoning her, Detective Reyes replied. He said nothing after that. Maribel woke later that night. Angry. Terrified. Cornered. When confronted with the toxicology results and the evidence seized from Rowan's office, vials, handwritten dosage notes, dates, she tried to pivot. It wasn't supposed to kill her, she insisted. Just make her unreliable. The word echoed in the room. Unreliable. Detective Reyes closed her notebook. That's attempted murder. Charges were filed within 48 hours. Conspiracy. Aggravated assault. Attempted murder. Rowan was arrested at the hospital. I watched him in silence as he was handcuffed, his eyes finally meeting mine. Not with love, not with regret, but with fear. That night, alone in my house for the first time in years, I slept deeper than I had in months. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of hearing my pain described clinically. Of watching messages projected onto screens. Of listening to experts explain how close I'd come to organ failure. To death. Maribel never looked at me. Rowan looked at me once, during closing arguments. I didn't look away. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty. I felt no triumph. Only release. 6 months later, I stood in a glass conference room in Denver, presenting to the Vesper Ridge board. They renewed the contract on the spot. As I packed up my laptop, one of the board members smiled at me. We're glad you're leading this, she said. You're resilient. I smiled back. They had no idea how much. People expect survival stories to end with a bang. Mine didn't. It ended quietly, the way real healing often does. Without applause, without revenge speeches, without me becoming someone unrecognizable. What ended loudly was the illusion I had lived in. A year after the trial, my life looked nothing like it had before, and yet, for the first time, it actually felt like mine. I no longer lived in the cedar house in the hills. I sold it without hesitation. Too many rooms echoed with memories that didn't deserve to stay. I moved downtown into a brick loft overlooking the French Broad River. Sunlight poured in through industrial windows, unapologetic and honest. Nothing was hidden there. Nothing could be quietly altered while I slept. Rowan and Maribel were both serving long sentences in separate facilities. I didn't follow the details closely. I didn't read the articles. I didn't need to. Justice, once delivered, doesn't require spectatorship. What surprised me most was not the anger I expected to feel, but the grief. Not for them. For myself. For the months I spent apologizing for my own body. For the times I let someone else explain my pain to me. For every instinct I muted because it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. I worked through that grief the same way I'd worked through everything else in my life. Slowly, deliberately, with brutal honesty. Professionally, everything accelerated. The Vesper Ridge success opened doors I'd never knocked on before. Invitations came in from firms in Seattle, Austin, even New York. I chose carefully. I learned that ambition didn't have to mean self-erasure. At 32, I was invited to give a keynote at the Pacific Northwest Strategy Forum. The night before my speech, I stood alone on the hotel balcony, the city lights below me shimmering like a different life. I thought about that brunch table. The coffee. The moment I decided not to drink. One choice. That was all it took to reroute everything. The next morning I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces. Sharp, curious, driven. People who reminded me of who I used to be before I learned how dangerous proximity could be. Success, I began, is often framed as talent plus effort. But there's a third component we don't talk about enough. I paused. Trust. And more importantly, who we give it to. The room stilled. Some of the most damaging obstacles you'll face won't come from competitors or market conditions. They'll come from people close enough to study your habits. Your weaknesses. Your pressure points. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. But intuition, I continued, isn't fear. It's information. And ignoring it doesn't make you brave. It makes you vulnerable. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke. How did you not break? She asked. When it was people you loved? I thought about it for a moment. I did break, I said. Just not in the way they expected. That night, back in my hotel room, I checked my email and saw a message from Vesper Ridge. Contract renewal confirmed. 3 years. I smiled, not with satisfaction but with peace. The best revenge wasn't their downfall. It was my continuation. I still drink coffee. I still accept dinners. I still believe in people. But now I listen, to my body, to my instincts, to the quiet signals that don't need permission to exist. Because I learned something the hard way. Survival isn't about becoming harder. It's about becoming clearer. And success, real success, belongs to those who trust themselves enough to walk away from poison, even when it's served with a smile.